There are moments in life when everything quietly falls apart, not with noise or chaos, but with silence. The kind of silence that settles into your chest when what you were holding on to no longer holds you back. This is a story about letting go, about how strength is not always found in gripping tighter, but in learning when to release. About how healing often begins not with answers, but with patience and the courage to stop fighting what has already changed. In a small coastal town where the sea spoke in whispers and storms arrived without warning, there lived a lighthouse keeper named Elias Moore. His life revolved around routine, discipline, and a single belief. If he stayed strong enough, nothing would be lost. But the ocean had other plans, and so did time. This is his journey, and maybe, in some quiet way, it's yours too. The lighthouse stood at the edge of the world, or at least that's how it felt to Elias Moore. A tall white pillar of stone, weathered by salt and wind, rising from black rock that cut sharply into the sea. Every night its beams stretched across the water, steady, patient, unwavering, just like the man who kept it alive. Elias had lived there for years, long enough that the sound of waves had replaced conversation, and the rhythm of the light had become his internal clock. Wake before dawn, check the mechanisms, polish the glass, record the weather, light the lamp at sunset, repeat. Discipline wasn't something he practiced, it was something he was. The townspeople rarely saw him. To them, he was a quiet figure, reliable, distant, almost timeless. The kind of man you trust without knowing. The kind of presence you only notice when it's gone. But inside the lighthouse, inside the silence, Elias carried a different story. He believed deeply in holding on. To responsibility. To routine. To the past. The lighthouse wasn't just a job, it was a promise. A promise that nothing on his watch would drift into darkness, that no ship would be lost if he stayed vigilant enough, that if he kept the light burning, life would remain predictable, safe, contained. And so, Elias held on tightly, too tightly. There were things he never questioned. The extra hour he spent checking the lamp, even when it had never failed. The way he replayed old conversations in his mind during long nights. The careful preservation of objects others might have thrown away. Notes, tools, memories. Letting go felt reckless, dangerous, like turning his back on the sea. You might recognize this kind of strength, the strength that never rests, the strength that believes endurance is the same as healing, the strength that whispers, if I stay strong enough, nothing will change. Elias rarely spoke about what he wanted. Desire felt indulgent. Instead, he focused on duty, purpose, control. If the lighthouse stood firm, then so would he. If the light never slept, neither could his hope. At night, when the beam swept across the ocean, Elias often stood still, hands clasped behind his back, watching. Ships passed in the distance, small, fragile dots moving toward places he would never go. He told himself he didn't envy them. He told himself the lighthouse was enough. But sometimes, just sometimes, when the fog rolled in thick and the sea went quiet, a question surfaced in the space between breaths. What happens when holding on becomes heavier than letting go? Elias pushed the thought away. He always did, because as long as the light kept turning, as long as his routine remained unbroken, he didn't yet answer it. And yet, even the strongest light cannot prevent every storm. Even the most disciplined heart cannot freeze time. The lighthouse shone on, unaware that its keeper was standing at the very edge of change. Morning arrived softly at the lighthouse, not with alarm clocks or voices, but with pale light slipping through the narrow windows and the steady breath of the sea below. Elias Moore rose as he always did, before the sun fully claimed the horizon. His body moved on memory alone, shaped by years of discipline. There was comfort in this predictability, a quiet reassurance that some things could still be controlled. He brewed his coffee slowly, standing near the window as steam curled into the cold air. Outside, the ocean looked calm, almost gentle. Its surface shimmered like polished glass, reflecting a sky that promised an easy day. Elias took this as a sign. Calm waters meant smooth operations. Smooth operations meant purpose fulfilled. This was how he measured success. Not in applause or recognition, but in absence. No distress signals, no missed log entries, no surprises. The lighthouse mechanism hummed steadily as he inspected it, gears turning in flawless rhythm. Elias noted every detail in his logbook, his handwriting precise and even. Each entry felt like proof that discipline worked, that consistency mattered, that effort, repeated daily, could hold the world in place. And for a time it seemed true. The townspeople depended on the light. Fishermen trusted it to guide them home before dawn. Cargo ships adjusted their routes by its beam. Even the birds circled it on fog-heavy mornings, drawn instinctively to its certainty. Elias noticed these small signs and allowed himself something close to pride. He told himself this was enough. Purpose without complication. Meaning without vulnerability. You might understand this feeling. The comfort of being needed. The quiet satisfaction of doing one thing well. The belief that as long as you stay useful, you will remain safe from loss. As days turned into weeks, Elias found rhythm in the sameness. He repaired weathered railings, replaced worn steps, and polished the great lens until it caught the sun like a captured star. Each task reinforced his faith in effort, in discipline, in the idea that progress was built not from leaps but from small, repeated acts. But hope, when built on control alone, is fragile. Sometimes, while eating his meals in silence, Elias would pause. The clink of his spoon against the bowl felt louder than it should have. His gaze would drift toward the empty chair across from him, a chair that had been empty for years, though he never moved it. He told himself it was just habit, just memory, nothing more. At night, the beam of the lighthouse swept across the water in perfect arcs. Elias watched it as if it were a heartbeat, proof that everything was still alive. He believed that as long as the light moved forward, the past would stay behind him. But deep down, a flaw lived quietly inside this hope. Elias believed effort could replace acceptance, that discipline could outwork grief, that holding on was the same as being strong. And the sea, patient and ancient, waited. Because calm waters do not mean the absence of storms. They only mean the storm has not yet arrived. Elias stood tall in the lighthouse, surrounded by the evidence of his success, unaware that the very thing he trusted most, his refusal to let go, was what would soon be tested. Hope was rising, but so was the tide. The storm arrived without ceremony. No warning bells, no gradual build, just a sudden shift in the air, heavy, charged, restless. Elias felt it before he saw it, a pressure behind the ribs that made breathing feel deliberate. The sea darkened, its calm surface tightening into sharp, uneven waves, as if something vast beneath it had turned in its sleep. By nightfall, the wind was howling. Elias moved through the lighthouse with practiced urgency. He secured doors, double-checked the lamp, reinforced shutters. His hands were steady, his mind focused. This was what discipline was for. This was why he had trained himself to be precise, controlled, unshaken. Outside, rain struck the stone walls like thrown gravel. Thunder rolled low and deep, rattling the glass. The lighthouse trembled, but the light stayed on, its beams slicing through sheets of rain, stubborn and bright. Elias told himself everything would be fine. Then the power surged. The hum of the mechanism stuttered, coughed, and fell silent. For the first time in years, the lighthouse went dark. Elias froze. Silence rushed in where the light had been. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that rings in your ears, loud with consequence. His heart pounded as he rushed to the controls, fingers flying, mind racing. He reset systems. He checked connections. He tried again. Nothing. Outside, the sea roared, unlit and dangerous. Somewhere beyond the darkness, ships moved blindly, trusting a light that was no longer there. And inside Elias, something cracked. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had done everything right. He had followed every rule. The storm worsened. Wind screamed through broken seams, water seeping into places it had never reached before. Elias fought against it, muscles burning, jaw clenched, refusing to surrender. He dragged equipment, climbed stairs slick with rain, worked by lantern light with shaking hands. But effort could not undo what was already breaking. A final surge of wind shattered one of the upper windows. Glass exploded inward, scattering like sharp rain. Elias stumbled back, heart racing, breath ragged. The lighthouse groaned, a deep, ancient sound, as if mourning its own failure. When the storm finally passed, it left devastation behind. The lamp was damaged beyond immediate repair. The lens cracked. The great light, the thing Elias believed would never fail, was gone. At dawn, Elias stood in the wreckage, soaked, exhausted, staring at the silent tower. The sea looked almost innocent now, as if it had done nothing wrong. The horizon glowed softly, indifferent to his loss. This wasn't just a failure of machinery, it was a failure of belief. Elias felt it then, the heavy, sinking realization that discipline had limits, that control was an illusion, that no matter how tightly you hold on, life can still take what you love. He sank onto the steps, head in his hands. The lighthouse stood behind him, broken and quiet. For the first time, Elias didn't know what to do next. You may know this moment. The moment when effort is no longer enough, when something precious is taken, and no amount of strength can bring it back. The storm had taken more than light. It had taken certainty. It had taken the story Elias told himself about who he was, and standing there in the cold morning air, surrounded by what remained, Elias Moore felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not fear, not anger, loss. Elias did not leave the lighthouse. Days passed, then more days, marked only by the slow movement of the sun across the cracked walls. The storm was gone, but its absence did not bring relief. Instead, it left behind a hollow quiet, one that pressed against his chest and refused to loosen. He told the town officials he needed time to repair, time to think, time to fix what had been broken. But what Elias really meant was this: time to pretend nothing had changed. Each morning, he followed the same routine. He woke before dawn. He made his coffee. He climbed the stairs. He checked the damaged lamp as if it might suddenly forgive him and come back to life. He polished the cracked glass, careful not to cut his hands as though gentleness could undo destruction. He wrote in his logbook anyway. The entries looked the same as before. Weather conditions, maintenance notes, observations. But something was missing. There was no mention of the darkness, no acknowledgement of failure. Elias wrote as if the light still turned each night, as if discipline alone could rewrite reality. This was his refusal. He refused to accept that something was gone, refused to believe that effort had limits, refused to release the idea that holding on could still save him. At night, Elias climbed to the top of the lighthouse and stood beside the dead lamp. He imagined the beams stretching across the water, imagined ships seeing it, imagined purpose returning to its familiar shape. Memory became his shelter. Guilt became his companion. If I had checked the system one more time, if I had been faster, if I had held on tighter, these thoughts looped endlessly, each one tying him more firmly to the past. Letting go felt impossible, not because he didn't understand it, but because it felt like admitting defeat. And Elias had built his entire identity on endurance. You may know this resistance, the way grief disguises itself as loyalty, the way pain convinces us that releasing the past means erasing its meaning. Elias believed that if he stopped trying to fix the lighthouse, he would be abandoning everything it represented. The years of service, the sacrifices, the version of himself who believed control was strength. So he stayed. The town adjusted without him. Temporary lights were installed. New systems were discussed. Life, inconveniently, moved forward. Each sign of progress felt like a quiet betrayal. Elias watched from a distance, arms crossed, jaw tight. He told himself they didn't understand, that they were rushing, that some things deserved patience. But beneath the anger was fear. Fear that without the lighthouse, he would be nothing more than a man standing in the ruins of his own certainty. Fear that letting go would leave him untethered, without purpose, without identity. The sea continued its endless motion, rising and falling untouched by his resistance. It did not argue. It did not explain. It simply moved on. And Elias Moore stood still, holding on to what was gone, refusing the tide, unaware that this resistance, more than the storm itself, was keeping him trapped. Eventually, even resistance grows tired. Elias began to notice the silence differently. It no longer felt sharp or accusing. It simply was. The lighthouse, once filled with the soft hum of machinery and purpose, now echoed with his footsteps. Each step reminded him of the space he was occupying, and the space that had been left behind. He stopped writing in the logbook, not because he had nothing to say, but because the words no longer felt honest. The pages sat blank, open to the day's date, waiting. Elias would stare at them for long moments before closing the book again, as if refusing to admit that time was still moving without his permission. Meals became forgettable. Some days he ate, some days he didn't notice that he hadn't. His body continued its routines even as his spirit withdrew. The lighthouse stood, but Elias felt hollow inside it, like a structure without a light. This was the lowest point. Not dramatic, not loud, just empty. You may recognize this stage, the quiet where grief settles in once the fight is over, the moment when exhaustion replaces anger and numbness replaces pain. Elias spent long hours sitting by the window, watching the sea. The water no longer felt like an adversary. It simply moved, unconcerned with his presence. Waves arrived and disappeared without apology. For the first time, Elias didn't try to control his thoughts. He let them come. Memories surfaced, not just of the lighthouse, but of moments he had held too tightly, afraid they would vanish if he loosened his grip. He realized then that the storm had not been the first loss he had refused to accept. It was only the one he could no longer deny. The realization did not bring relief. It brought stillness. Elias felt suspended between who he had been and who he did not yet know how to become. The old rules no longer applied, but no new ones had formed. Purpose had dissolved, leaving behind questions he had spent years avoiding. Who am I without what I protect? Who am I when discipline is no longer enough? There was no answer, only breath, only time. And yet, in this quiet, something subtle shifted. The emptiness was painful, but it was honest. For the first time, Elias was not pretending, not fixing, not holding on, just existing. This was the moment before change becomes possible. Not because the pain ends, but because resistance does. The sea continued to move. The lighthouse continued to stand. And Elias Moore, alone in the stillness, finally stopped fighting the silence. The encounter did not arrive with significance. No dramatic entrance, no words that sounded like wisdom. It arrived on an ordinary afternoon when the sky was pale and the sea lay stretched out like a long, tired breath. Elias was repairing a loose step near the base of the lighthouse when he noticed someone standing a short distance away. A figure small against the vastness of the shore. An older man, wrapped in a worn coat, watching the water with unhurried attention. Elias hesitated. Visitors were rare now. He considered ignoring him, but something in the man's stillness felt familiar, not intrusive, not demanding, just present. After a while the man spoke, his voice gentle and unassuming. "She doesn't ask much of us," he said, nodding toward the sea. "Only that we don't try to hold her still." Elias straightened slowly. "The sea takes more than it gives," he replied. His voice carried no anger, only fatigue. The man smiled faintly. "Only if we believe what it gives must last forever." They stood in silence after that. No pressure to fill the space. No need to explain. Elias felt something unfamiliar loosen in his chest. Not relief, but permission. The man introduced himself as Jonah, a retired fisherman who walked the shore each afternoon. He spoke sparingly, choosing his words as if they were stones placed carefully in water. They talked about small things, weather, time, the way the horizon never stays the same. Elias found himself listening more than speaking, an unusual posture for someone who had spent years instructing himself through discipline and routine. After a while, Elias gestured toward the lighthouse. "It used to be brighter," he said quietly. Jonah nodded. "It still stands." That was all. But something in that simple truth settled deep. The lighthouse had not disappeared. It had changed. And so had Elias. Jonah did not offer advice. He did not suggest repairs or timelines. He simply walked with Elias for a while, matching his pace before turning back toward the town. Before leaving, Jonah paused. "Some things don't need to be fixed," he said. "They need to be released." Then he was gone. Elias stood alone again, but the loneliness felt different, less heavy, less closed. The words echoed softly, not as instruction, but as an invitation. You may have known moments like this, when wisdom comes quietly, when healing begins not with answers, but with being seen. That night, Elias climbed the lighthouse steps once more. He stood beside the broken lamp, not to repair it, not to mourn it, but to acknowledge it. For the first time, he did not imagine the light returning. He simply stood. And in that stillness, something within him shifted. Not all at once, but enough to begin. Letting go did not arrive as a single decision. It arrived as a series of small, quiet choices, almost unnoticeable at first. Elias began by changing nothing that looked important. He still woke early. He still walked the perimeter of the lighthouse. But inside those routines, something softened. He no longer rushed to fill the silence. He allowed pauses to exist without correction. The first real act of release came one morning when he closed the logbook. Not forever, just for the day. He placed it carefully on the shelf and stepped outside instead. The air smelled of salt and distant rain. Elias breathed deeply, as if testing a new language. For years, discipline had been his anchor, but now he wondered if it had also been his rope, binding him to what no longer was. He started walking the shoreline in the afternoons, not with purpose, not with destination, just movement, just presence. The sea greeted him differently now, not as something to be managed, but as something to be witnessed. Some days were harder than others. Memories surfaced without warning. The sound of the lighthouse hum, the certainty he once felt. Each memory tugged at him, asking him to return to who he had been. Elias felt the pull, and for the first time he did not tighten his grip. He let the feeling pass. You might know this practice, the courage of allowing pain without wrestling it, the discipline of release. Elias began making small repairs, not to restore the lighthouse to its former state, but to care for what remained. He fixed the steps. He sealed cracks. He cleaned without expectation. These actions were no longer about control. They were about respect. And slowly healing followed. Not as happiness, not as certainty, but as peace. He noticed he was sleeping better, eating regularly, standing straighter. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for years loosened its hold. Letting go did not make him weaker, it made him lighter. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Elias stood at the top of the lighthouse and watched the sky change colors. The horizon glowed softly, unconcerned with beams or signals, and for the first time, Elias did not feel the need to illuminate it. He understood then. Purpose does not disappear when form changes. Strength does not vanish when we release control. This was rebirth. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet return to himself. Healing is never a straight line. It moves like the sea, forward, backward, sideways, sometimes calm, sometimes sudden. Just when Elias began to trust the quiet peace settling into his days, the old waves returned. It started with a letter. The town council had finalized plans for a new automated lighthouse system farther down the coast. Modern, efficient, brighter than anything Elias had ever maintained. The old lighthouse, they wrote, would be decommissioned, preserved as a landmark, no longer needed. Elias read the letter once, then again. Something tight coiled in his chest, the familiar pull of identity, loss, and unfinished attachment. He told himself he was past this, that he had learned to release. But grief is patient, and it knows where to knock. That night Elias dreamed of the light turning again. Bright, powerful, necessary. He woke before dawn, heart racing, muscles tense, his old instinct roaring back to life. Fix it. Fight for it. Don't let it go. You may recognize this moment, when growth is tested not by new pain but by old habits resurfacing, when the past offers itself back to you, dressed as purpose. Elias spent the morning pacing the lighthouse, touching the walls, the railings, the broken lamp. His hands lingered longer than they had in weeks. He felt the urge to prove something. To himself, to the town, to time itself. But this time he paused. Discipline, he realized, was not about returning to control. It was about choosing consistency and letting go. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. He did not act. He did not argue. He went for his walk instead. The sea was restless that afternoon, waves rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Elias matched his steps to his breath, letting the motion ground him. The urge to reclaim the past came and went, just like the waves. Strength revealed itself not in resistance, but in restraint. By evening, the tension had eased, not disappeared, but softened. Elias understood then that transformation is proven not in moments of peace, but in moments of temptation. He had not failed. He had practiced. The old waves returned, but they did not carry him away. The light returned slowly, not to the lighthouse, but to Elias. There was no ceremony, no announcement, just a quiet shift in how the days felt. He noticed it one morning while standing at the window, watching the sea breathe in and out. The ache that used to sit beneath his ribs was still there, but it no longer defined the moment. It existed without command. Elias had learned something the sea had always known. That movement does not mean loss. That release does not mean emptiness. That light can exist without being cast outward. He began helping in small ways around the town, teaching younger workers how to read the tides, showing fishermen how to spot subtle changes in weather, sharing knowledge without attachment. His value was no longer tied to one structure or one role. Purpose had widened. The lighthouse became a place of memory, not identity. Elias visited it often, but without the need to restore it to what it was. He accepted its stillness as part of its story, and his. One evening, as the sun set low, the sky painted itself in soft gold and blue. Elias stood at the edge of the shore, hands relaxed at his sides. The horizon glowed, not from a beam, but from the quiet certainty of balance. This was the new dawn, not brighter, just truer. Elias smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. There comes a time when holding on stops being strength and becomes weight. You may be standing there now, gripping something that once gave you purpose, believing that discipline means never releasing your grasp. But the truth is quieter than that. Strength is knowing when to stay and when to step back. Healing begins when we stop fighting what has already changed. Letting go is not forgetting. It is honoring without attachment. Discipline is not control. It is consistency in choosing peace. Failure is not the end of purpose. It is the widening of it. Rebirth does not arrive with noise. It comes softly when you are ready to listen. Like the sea, life will take and give in equal measure, and like the lighthouse keeper, you do not lose your light when the beam goes dark. Sometimes the light turns inward, guiding you home. If this story spoke to something in you, let it sit quietly. Share it with someone who may need it, and stay with us for more stories that heal, strengthen, and remind you who you are. Because hope, when gentle, lasts.